Well, let's just develop the skill of process thinking. And this means that in order to understand what is happening now, you need to roll back into the past and see what happened then. In the past, a problem arose that in Marxism was called the general crisis of capitalism. The general crisis of capitalism is a multifaceted phenomenon, but the main muck that it generates is the global biospheric social, so-called ecological crisis. They tried to prevent it. Marxism was supposed to become a preventative tool. Therefore, when the manifesto of the Communist Party was written, it was immediately published in 5 languages in all advanced countries of that time. This is 1848. Well, then society lived in the understanding that history flows by itself. There is no global governance, so no one perceived Marxism as a global project. Well, the task was simple: to maintain a monopoly on governance. So, in Marxism, there was nothing about psychology, about governance. There is nothing about governance towards economy. But there is only demagoguery on the theme that everyone will live under communism, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. How these needs and abilities are formed, about this there is not a whisper. That is, all governance is after all on the principles of know-how, but there should be no consumption race, and everyone should be provided with some reasonable sufficiency of consumption, provided that people are loyal to the system. Well, in general, nothing succeeded in the 19th century. The Paris Commune did not develop into a pan-European revolution. The revolution of 1848, although it was in many countries, but it also drowned. Well, and then the First World War was organized in order, after it, to organize a world socialist revolution. Lenin was poorly initiated into this theme, or not at all initiated into it. Therefore, a revolution took place in Russia, although the entire European social democracy, in all the warring countries, was waiting for a revolution in Germany. But the Germans hesitated, and so what happened happened. Lenin thwarted the World Socialist Revolution with the Great October Revolution and the Brest-Litovsk Peace. So socialism had to be built in a single country, and this was approved. But Stalin, after the war, passed the death sentence on Marxism, although neither the faithful Stalinists nor the faithful opponents of Stalin understood this. The thing is that in Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR, he showed the metrological inconsistency of the political economy of Marxism. Well, in general, whoever has understood what metrological consistency is, knows what it is. They should understand that if science catches some theory on metrological inconsistency, then this theory must be finished. But the Marxists still do not understand this and do not know. Then, Stalin, in his work, Marxism and Problems of Linguistics, pointed out that science is controlled by mafia groupings. That is, this work is not at all about Marxism, not at all about linguistics, but about the fact that science is controlled by mafia groupings, which themselves decide what is truth and which research should be prohibited. This applies not only to science, however, but to all other areas of activity. Well, and among other things, Stalin drew attention to the Jewish question, and in such a way that Zionism is bad, anti-Semitism is even worse. Well, philosophers and sociologists have been struggling with this riddle for several decades. Therefore, the question arose of how to liquidate the most general crisis of capitalism. If it was not possible to liquidate it by socio-cultural means, but if it was not possible by socio-cultural means, that is, it was not possible to modify the culture, then it's necessary to destroy the biomass that carries the unacceptable culture, in the given case, the culture of bourgeois liberalism. Therefore, after the Second World War, the process of bringing migrants to Europe from former colonies slowly began. Further, there began the process of corrupting the indigenous population with the objective of reducing the birth rate, hence all the tolerance and disquiet concerning the LGBT community. This is a political technology, the purpose of which is simple: to replace the indigenous population of Europe carrying a liberal bourgeois culture by a population that will not carry this culture, and that is it. But the global biospheric socio-ecological crisis has been growing. And now, if you look at the maps of the world's oceans, that is, maps of pollution up to 5 kilograms per square meter of plastic, the easiest way, well, if you do not solve the problem of ecological crisis, then to buy time to solve it in the future, is to reduce the population of the planet. Well, wars are not very suitable for this cause, since superpowers, and not only them, have nuclear weapons. This is very bad for a world war, since it will be unpredictably destructive. But the pandemic is sluggish. It is good for this. The main thing is to die out slowly, because if 90% of the population die out like from the plague within a few months, then the system loses governability. But if a pandemic flows slowly, it will mow people down. Then you can govern it. You can govern the social economic system in conditions of slow dying. So do not deceive yourself with regards to COVID. This is nothing more than global training on the theme of how to govern the biospheric social economic system in conditions of governed pandemics. Since the task is to perfect governorial technologies, the mortality rate is relatively low. If we talk about the statistics of the disease, many enterprises insist that the statistics have not changed much when juxtaposed with those years when COVID was not there. But what will come after COVID? This will already be much more serious. Do not think that the World Health Organization is concerned about the health of the population. If it was concerned about this matter, it would have pursued a different policy, and not the one it is pursuing. Therefore, the prospects for global civilization are generally difficult. A governed, slow extinction lies ahead. On the Georgia Guidestones, the final population of about 500 million people is named for the entire planet, and this raises the question of what quotas for life have been allocated by the world behind the scenes to all countries, including Russia. Moreover, if we talk about Russia, then we only have de jure sovereignty. De facto, there is no sovereignty. Because if the sovereignty is de facto, then the country should be independent in questions of world perception, in questions of comprehension of what is happening and intentions for the future. Well, our politics feeds on the scum of Western philosophical and sociological thought. Sovereignty begins with the sovereignty of the world perception and intellectual sovereignty. Japan and China, which have banned teaching in schools and higher educational institutions on the basis of the Western curricula, in this sense are closer to the fullness of sovereignty than Russia. The way of life that mankind leads is destructive. And in relation to the biosphere of the planet, we now consume more natural resources in 6 months, if not less, than nature can restore in a year. That is, in half a year, we consume as much as nature can restore in a whole year. That is, it is the collapse of civilization. Yes, with a different way of life, humanity can be more numerous even than 9 billion. Because there are estimates that the ecological niche of man can accommodate up to 27 to 30 billion people, but with a different way of life, in which there is no place for the consumption race, there is no place for wastefulness. Well, if more than a third of the foodstuffs in the USA are thrown into the trash, how is this to be understood? It is not provided for in them, because if they wanted, they would have switched to it long ago. They do not need it, because the main task is to prevent a person from taking place as a human. They want the Earth to be the planet of the apes.
Собственно, ковид-вирус, нацелен как раз на почищение, так скажем, вот этого общества, которое ведет неправильный, образ жизни, скажем так, захламляя планету.
COVID is not aiming at this. COVID is aimed at perfecting technologies of governance in conditions of a cascade of pandemics that will really mow down in the future. They will be more deadly than COVID. COVID is an unnatural virus. It is a product of high technology. This is not to say that they got out of control, because if they got out of control, then they got out of control of the US government, just as Marxism got out of control of the British government. Well, this is just an indicator that the owners of COVID are not the United States or China, through which COVID was planted.
Понятно. А тогда сейчас вот эти попытки вакцинации и разработки вакцины повсеместной, они на что нацелены?
You see, the European medical tradition is oriented on ensuring the commercial effectiveness of medicine. Now, if you cooked up some kind of vaccine, were able to push it into the national vaccination calendar, then you will be provided with income for several decades. Further, if we talk about the bureaucratic core and the deputy core, then these are people who are incompetent and feeble-minded in relation to the occupied by them positions. There, people are gathered who don't know either probability theory or mathematical statistics and do not know how to use them. Therefore, governance is not possible. You can only steer and make a fuss about how to cut the budget, how to increase your salaries, and how to justify yourself in front of the people. And that's all. Therefore, vaccination as such is primarily a commercial project. In terms of effectiveness, Well, doctors say it takes 5 years to create a reliable vaccine. All vaccines appeared within the course of a year. That is, they have not passed the full-fledged tests. What does this mean in practice? Well, let's say you tested the vaccine on 10,000 volunteers. But the practice of vaccination worldwide shows that side effects can come out with a circulation of several 100,000 or even millions of people. That is, those for whom the vaccine is either deadly or causes serious damage to the body may not get into these 10,000. Then how did the vaccination go in Russia? Well, the president said it would be voluntary. De facto, it is compulsory. If you write on this theme to the presidential administration, they will reply that they are not aware of this initiative of the local authorities, and therefore, we have nothing to do with it. What? We have that era of specific princely fragmentation. The next question is about voluntary informed consent. So, I don't understand vaccines, immunology. So why do you pass the responsibility for the consequences of vaccinations onto the patient? Suggest that doctors, district therapists, put signatures. I bear responsibility for admitting citizens such and such to vaccination. You will immediately see that doctors are reluctant to take responsibility because they know that not everything can be used. And yes, there are really hard cases. Here I have contacts on my phone. Well, there are probably 200 of them, hardly more. From the moment the compulsory vaccination began, friends messaged about angioedema, death within a few days after vaccination by heart attack, a heart attack after 6 hours of vaccination, and oncology within a month after vaccination. Well, in addition to this, the death of 4 people in the Krasnodar Krai, as a result of which a girl was orphaned, when her father, mother, grandfather, grandmothers died. Medicine said that they were sick. Well, you see, after all, what is the matter? The mother was supposed to go to a planned operation, which they refused to do in the absence of vaccination. She waived a voluntary consent. As a result, she died. Who is responsible for this? Why are Popova and Murashko not responsible for this? This is the organization of vaccination. If deaths are possible, then let's vaccinate based on the study of biomaterials of patients. If you say that someone died there because he was already infected, then let's put it through quarantine. If you think that biological warfare is taking place, and splinters will fly when the axe is plied, just say, there is a biological warfare, so victims are inevitable, and the choice is this: either a victim from COVID, there are so many of them, or a victim from vaccination, there are so many of them. If someone dies, becomes disabled, then we take on state support with the level of income that was before. There is no money. To build yachts bigger than the cruiser Aurora, millionaires have money. And what about the patriotism of these very millionaires? The patriotism of their wallet. Well, officials are either corrupt or idiots in relation to their positions and responsibilities. Therefore, there is a systemic crisis in the country. Both the COVID campaign and the COVID vaccination, they just expose it. But there may still be consequences that will appear after several years or even decades after mass vaccination. The history of medicine knows such cases. Therefore, vaccination, this is more questions than answers. Here we have the academician Chuchalin. His speech was posted on YouTube on one of the local TV channels. He said that a reliable way to prevent infection with COVID and other viruses is to regularly flush the nasopharynx. He named the means. It costs pennies. In addition, hydrogen peroxide, diluted 1:8, 1:10, is also a means for flushing the nasopharynx. Because for a year and a half from when COVID was announced, statistics have been developing among friends. Of those who flush, no one got sick. Everyone who got sick either did not flush or allowed breaks of several days in flushing. But peroxide is pennies. Other means are pennies. And here the pharmacists have to cut the budget. So vaccination is compulsory at the state expense. In the end, anyway, at the expense of citizens. There is such an opinion, but so far science has not reached this point. This is one side of the question. The second side of the question is that you cannot fool nature, and medicine, in its European tradition, in general, works against the mechanism of natural selection. Therefore, if it strengthens the action in this direction, then humanity will not be killed by the flu, not by smallpox from which they have long ceased to vaccinate, which can be reborn. And here the other day there were publications that it has already been discovered in the United States. Humanity will be killed by biological degeneration when new generations, due to biological degeneration, will be unable not only to develop culture and solve problems, but even to master the cultural achievements created by ancestors. Well, first of all, capitalism is built on system-forming principles. These system-forming principles generate what has long been called the general crisis of capitalism. Along with this, there are means of governance towards crisis. That is, the system itself produces the crisis potential, but it can be discharged. But if you give the command not to discharge, then a crisis will occur. This is true, but if we talk about the global crisis, then things are worse, because civilization was drawn into a collapse. That is, it is degradation. In order to egress from the collapse, a change in the system-forming principles is required. Nobody wants to do this.
И то, что сейчас проводит мировая, так скажем, управляющая какая-то система, которая ввела вот в этот плановый кризис по уменьшению населения, деградации экономики, она не хочет просто иные формы.
Она не хочет.
It doesn't want
Просто
it.
хочет этот кризис ослабить, как вы сказали, там, как управляя, как бы снять напряжение этой кризисности.
Well, it wanted to go over to the economic structure of so-called socialism, in which there is no consumption race, there is a planned economy. It did not work out on the basis of Marxism. Now they will move to the same by other means. But in the process of transition, they want to take out about 80 to 90% of the world's population within 10 to 15 years.
И это новое средство цифровизации.
No, digitalization has nothing to do with it. The main means are pandemics, famine, and local wars.
Ну, вот такой вопрос, может быть, для всех будет понятно. Мы говорим глобально, да, система ее устраивает, система там сейчас вошла в коллапс, но это наверняка все управляемые, контролируемые процессы с кем-то. Они кому-то нужны, и в рамках какого времени от них это они, которые стоят за этой системой, какой-то получат от этого результат.
Well, after all, this is the main mistake of those who think that there is a global government. They do not understand that world domination is not an objective. It is a means of realizing another objective, about which they do not speak. And to understand this very different objective, you need to understand some other things. So, let's turn to the Quran. In general, God created man. That is, the main task is to prevent a person from taking place in the quality of a human, because being born in the biological species Homo sapiens, this is not enough to take place as a human. And the task is for man to be a herd pack monkey of the species Homo sapiens, slightly trained by civilization. To solve this task, world domination is required, because while world domination is not established, a breakthrough into humanness can occur somewhere, and the herd pack monkey of the species Homo sapiens will become human, God's successor on earth. After that, Comrade Iblis will have to finish all the games and bear responsibility. But in general, this is a theme that few people talk about. And when they talk about world domination and that someone is striving for it, then they see in this the objective, although world domination is only a means to achieve another objective, not to allow the civilization of humanness to be built on earth. In the end, in general, it all started with the statement, I am better than him. Satanism begins with this phrase, and any elite who declare we are better than them are always inclined to Satanism. But when it comes to the representatives of esoteric subcultures, that is, some knowledge for initiates, some skills for initiates, some special organization for initiated chosen ones, then in the end, all these games end with Satanism. It's just that this initiation system is multi-layered. If you go through the layers, then everything will ultimately be in such a way that the most highly initiated appear as the servants of Iblis. But why? There is always somewhere to go. Because if we turn even to the Bible, that is, there are discrepancies between the synodal translation and the Ostrog Bible, when scenes of the temptation of Christ in the wilderness are described. Then, on Satan's proposal to turn stones into bread, in the synodal translation, "Get away from me, Satan." In the Ostrog Bible, "Follow me." But Satan refused.
Предлагал царство.
Well, he offered him a lot there. This is in a different place. In the desert, he proposed turning stones into bread.
Когда он постился.
Yes.
Но ведь на этом вот желании быть лучше, чем другие, наша жизнь построена. Я хочу быть лучшим профессионалом, чем другие. Я хочу получать больше и кушать лучше, чем другие.
There is some difference here. I want to be the best professional. This is one thing. And I am better than them. This is another thing. Here, nevertheless, it is implied that the Almighty decides who is better and who is worse. If you look at life this way, of his own inner person is only his sins,
Которые должны быть поменьше.
which ideally shouldn't exist at all. But everything that concerns the blago, then a person is only the retranslator of God's mercy into this world. Yes, in some cases he can take the initiative, and God is the helper in this matter. But still.
Я так понимаю, образ будущего – это наш путь, наша цель развития общества, да? К чему мы должны стремиться?
The vision of the future is the description of the mode of functioning of the civilization, which ensures the harmony of the civilization of the biosphere and intrasocial harmony too. That is, criminality, especially organized crime, should disappear in this society. But this is a different mentality, a different raviousness of the population, different volitional qualities, a different upbringing. Well, in general, you need to understand that globalization is an objective process. But the conception of globalization, objectives, ways and means of achieving these objectives, they are always chosen subjectively, formed subjectively. Well, in reality, in our global history, over the past 3,000 years or so, the West has been the carrier of the project of globalization. One of the components of this project of globalization is the final solution of the Russian question. That is, the Russian language and the carrying it population should disappear. Well, the population can turn into ethnographic material in much the same way as the population of Byzantium, which in general became Turks over time, was transformed into ethnographic raw material. In general, this means that if we do not like such a project of globalization, then there must be our own Russian project of globalization, and a project that will be attractive to the peoples of other regions of the planet, and they will support it, strive to enter it not because they are paid, but because in this project they will see a bright future for their children and grandchildren. If this is not the case, if the current Russian state power refuses to generate its own project of globalization, which will ensure social previousness here and now, and which will support the objective laws to which the lives of people are subordinate, well, there will be no future for Russia. Therefore, if Russia does not have its own project of globalization, which we could offer to other peoples, which would be attractive for them and not corrupt, then there is no future for Russia. Because if you don't have your own globalization project, you will take the place that others have prepared for you in their globalization project. And centuries-old historical practice shows that the Western project of globalization is, first of all, an anti-Russian project. Therefore, from talking, we need to get down to the endeavor, to get rid of illusions, to ponder on what is the providence of the Most High, what share in this providence each chooses, and honestly and добросовестно work for this. This is a person with nraviousness, world understanding, and of nationality, he can be of any. Those who will develop, and those who will upbring children in such a way that they would be previous, creative personalities, everything will be fine with those. And the rest, unfortunately, are grass on the battlefield, trampled, burned out, if not by these, then by those. The psychodynamics of society is such that it reproduces such a cyclics in history, two phases in a complete cycle. We are living in the second phase. Representatives of state power are unteachable, because for them the maximum they can do is read 4 A4 pages, no more. And here you have to read thick books, correlate thick books with life. It is impossible to do this against the background of fulfilling official duties. The Higher School of Economics, the Academy of Civil Service, faculties and specialties, state and municipal administration, prepare the same ignoramuses who do not know how to think and use even the knowledge they know. Therefore, this can only produce a catastrophe. And those who understand this, wasting time on teaching the unteachable, is a stupid occupation. You have to sit by yourself, study, develop, help others in this, so that the alternative governorial corps, which will enter in this same power, in the ideal would gradually form. In the worst case, well, this power will lose power, and other people will pick it up. The only question is who will pick it up. Navalnylings, liberal pro-Westerners, nationalist statists, or a new generation of Bolsheviks.
Но пока мы знаем, что люди есть и с более нравственными, так скажем, качествами, и есть они и во власти, есть на определенных уровнях, но не видим, по крайней мере, может быть, не видим ничего.
Knowledge is needed. If there is no knowledge, and you are in the bodies of state power, then you are a parasite. You make some dough, and you don't do anything else. You create the appearance of your well-intentionedness and concern. If there is no knowledge, then there is nothing to transform into governorial skills. This is a pervasive problem. This is not only in Russia. This very Keynes, one of the outstanding Western economists of the 20th century, spoke in the sense that the most unpleasant thing for the government is to be well informed, because it makes it difficult to make governorial decisions. And so it's easier. Some advisor comes and says, let's do it like this, and everything will be fine. This is all vanity, because all the legislative drafting of the Duma is not sovereign. It is anti-patriotic, because the laws are written under the Western conception of globalization, which provides for the elimination of the Russian culture, the Russian language, and their carriers. And that's it. And if you look at the demographic map of Russia, it is dying out. Pskov and Novgorod oblasts are leaders in dying out. Our central bank does one thing. It creates an economic genocide, because the country lives in a usurious noose. 100 kilometers of a car's mileage is from 20 to 50 milligrams of worn-out rubber thrown into nature. And plastic, after all, is basically someone drinks a Pepsi, throws away the bottle is carried away somewhere, and is found somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. Synthetics are loaded into a washing machine, the washing is spun, washed, the water goes down the drain, microparticles of synthetic fabrics are found in the waters of the Mariana Trench.
Микрочастицы. А то, что плавают в океане острова из этого пластика, крупного пластика,
They are thrown overboard from a cruise ship.
производитель кто это?
The question is not who the manufacturer is. The question is how they relate to this. Because by and large, if the energy problem was solved, well, all raw materials should go mainly in a closed cycle.
Вот, кстати, как пример, был вот и в других странах есть до сих пор присутствует оборотная тара. То есть мы пришли в один из достаточно хороших ресторанов, и нам приносят воду в потертой бутылке.
So the Germans, back in the 60s, calculated that the recycling of glass containers as a whole is economically profitable and less harmful from the point of view of ecology than all these disposable bags.
Вот тогда, касаясь Китая, вот сейчас для России это такой основной поставщик товаров, да, для России. Вот. И на политическом уровне сейчас Китай какое место заявляет для России как партнер, как страна?
Well, China has always had its own mind. China has always played the long game. Therefore, the relationship between China and Russia, it is conditioned by, well, the correlation of power of both states on all 6 priorities of generalized means of governance. China safely escaped perestroika and its consequences by simply crushing the elite kids in Tiananmen Square with tanks. They did not have their own Gorbachev, and the local pseudo-Zhretsu there turned out to be more consistent than ours here. Indeed, the whole society cannot participate in the current governance. The rally is incapable of governance. The wisest rally elects an executive committee that implements all wishes.
Ну, это это не по желанию, вот увеличение пенсионного возраста, не по желанию же.
Ну, продули
Well, we
холодную
lost the Cold
войну,
War, we pay.
платим.
Платим, ну. А если бы народ принимал решение участвовать или не участвовать?
А что народ
And
принимает
what did
решение?
people decide?
Для того, чтобы
In order to
понять
work out and
это
adopt a decision,
решение,
you
надо
need to know a
очень много
lot.
чего знать. Циклика
The
русской
cyclics of Russian
истории
history is
показывает,
simple. The full
что
cycle
цикл
includes
включает
two
в себя две
phases.
фазы. Первая
The first
фаза –
phase is an
это
attempt
построение
to build an
большого
all-people
государства.
state.
Она
It ends with the
завершается
generation of an
правлением
elite,
элиты,
which
которой
does not need an
большое
all-people state.
государство не нужно. Элита устраивает
The elite arranges a
государственный
coup
переворот
d'etat
и
and begins to build an
начинает
elite corporative state
корпоративное
in which it tries to
государство,
push the
которое
people
пытается
around.
помыкать народом. Но элита считает,
Well, the elite
что
thinks that they are not
они
obliged to know
ничего
anything
не обязаны,
and be able to do
они
anything.
холопы.
The servants should do it.
Поэтому
Therefore, the
cadre
cadre politics pursued by the elite corporative states is such that every year
такова, что
there are
с
fewer
каждым
and fewer
годом
competent and professional people in power.
начальных и деловых людей во власти. Дальше новая
Then another
катастрофа будет
catastrophe, and the cycle
Мы
repeats.
сейчас живем во
We are
второй
now living
фазе,
in the second phase of a complete cycle.
корпоративная государственность, возникшая в
Elite
результате
corporative statehood, which
ползучего
arose as a result of a
переворота,
creeping coup d'etat
который длился
that
с
lasted from 1953 to 1993, from the assassination of Stalin
до
to the
принятия
adoption of the current
ныне
constitution.
действующей. А дальше вот психодинамика
And then
работает
psychodynamics works in an
в
automatic
автоматическом
mode.
режиме. Вот. Если не нравится
Now, if you don't
перспектива,
like the
надо
prospects,
заниматься
you need to
личностным
engage in
развитием,
personal development, learn the skills of
учиться
self-organization in order to prevent a
самоорганизации для
catastrophe,
того, чтобы
or in order that, if it
профилактировать
does happen,
катастрофу, либо
there is
для
someone to
того,
take
чтобы
power
если
and put
это
things in order.
случится, было кому взять власть и навести порядок.
Но вот мы сейчас не видим таких, как инструмент, как...
А
Why
зачем
see
их
them?
видеть?
Например, но мы хотим, чтобы это по-другому было.
Ну, так,
Well, sit
сядь за
down, take
книжечку,
up books,
почитаешь,
read and
подумаешь.
ponder. Then
Вот,
look in the
потом
mirror and
посмотрел в
see.
зеркало,
That's it.
увидел. Все. Есть
There is a
закон,
law,
управленческий
a
закон.
governorial law.
Он
It requires the
требует
mutual correspondence
соответствия
of the system of governance to the
системы
object of
управления,
governance.
объекта управления. Вот. В марксизме
In
это
Marxism, it is called
называется
the upper classes
верхи
cannot,
не
the
могут,
lower
а все
classes do not
хотят.
want to.
Вот. Ну, верхи все
But the upper
работают
classes
для
are
того,
all
чтобы
working so that they cannot,
а
and the lower
низы
classes do not want to. The
не
more
хотят.
time passes, the more.
Чем дальше, тем больше.
Ну, есть низы, которые хотят.
Ну, кто хочет?
Well, who wants to?
Ну, кто?
Ну, люди, которые осознанно
Чего?
видят, что происходит, да, и с чем-то не согласны. Они говорят, ну, а у нас нет инструмента, чтобы повлиять на это.
Вот.
Нет инструмента.
They do not want to.
Они не хотят. Но нигилизм,
But
он
nihilism,
не созидает.
it is not creative.
Нигилизм может только
Nihilism can
разрушать.
only destroy.
А вот то,
But
что
the
в
fact that in
17
1917 we did not collapse completely is the merit of the
заслуга
Bolsheviks
большевиков,
and the fact that they had a project for the
играет
future
будущего
and the
и
political will to
всё
implement it.
реализовать. Вот и
That's
всё.
all.
Если нету
If there is no
политической
political will,
сопли и
then
вопли.
tears and snot.
Ну, у тех представителей нашей власти она и не будет.
Ну,
Well, if we talk about the
если говорить о
representatives of the bodies of
представителях
state
власти,
power,
то у нас
then we have an
элитарный
elite corporative statehood.
Они живут
They
в
live in the
режиме
mode,
«остановись,
stop
момент,
moment,
и
you are
будет
wonderful.
прекрасно». Всем по
Everyone knows
Фаусту
according to
известно,
Faust
чем
how it
кончается.
ends.
Потому что
Because the task of the
задача власти
authorities
не
is not to balance by supporting the
балансировать
stabilized
политику
crap.
стабилизации. Задача
The task of the
власти
authorities is to
выявлять
identify
проблемы,
problems and prevent their aggravation.
профилактировать их
That is,
обострение.
to respond to the challenges of the
Отвечать на
time
вызовы
and
времени,
prevent the challenges of the time.
профилактировать вызовы времени.
And this requires a vision of the future, a project of the future, scientific methodological support for the development of this project, its implementation, and cadres who carry this scientific methodological support, and for them this vision of the future is desirable. And the Russian authorities have none of these three components. Because if we talk about a vision of the future, there is none. We open the programs of any political party, blah, 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 blah. We are for all that is good, against all that is bad. Scientific methodological support, Western science in a pure form. There is nothing intelligible on the theme of how to govern the biospheric social economic system, and there will not be. Cadres. Well, if a person graduated from a higher school of economics or a civil service academy, there is nothing to talk to him about. He has read a lot of books, read a lot of manuals, does not know life, does not want to know, wants a salary of $1 zillion right away, and that's it.
Проекты Сталина по ревизии марксизма, выработке новых экономических, политических, научных, методологических баз под социализм было в створе интересов глобального предела?
Нет.
No, because Stalin really wanted real Soviet power when the people are actively creating their own destiny and the future of mankind. This was not part of the plans of the higher-ups of the project of globalization.
Как вы думаете, они противодействовали деятельно на протяжении 20 лет, когда Сталин активно пытался заставить выработать науку социологическую новую для социализма?
Well, they didn't really oppose, because there was no need for that. Stalin, if one believes Galushka, reproached the authors of the textbook for the fact that they were citing Marxism.
Они не хотели, у них не было возможностей, или мотивированы были саботировать.
They were just what they were. They were allegiant lackeys.
Так что же можно сделать вывод тогда такой? Среди советских среди русских людей нет возможности таких людей, которые могут собраться и выработать адекватное что-то.
Ну, почему?
But why? How will the officialdom react to this? The officialdom will react badly to this, because the tasks of the scientific officialdom are not the search for the truth, but the service of the conception.
Какое дело было для официоза в сталинское время, когда Сталин просит, требует?
Well, you see, there may be a voice-controlled washing machine. Demand from it what? Here the same thing. Zombies, well-read, they do not know how to think. What could they do?
Куда делись-то с расширенным функционалом? Такая страна огромная.
Well, they cultivated allegiance over the course of several centuries. Stalin, in his world understanding, was 100 to 150 years ahead of his era.
Мессия?
Factually, yes.
И такой зашлифовать
Давай, надо подумать, паузу нажмем.
Нет, думать не надо, такой легкий вопрос. Вы какую-нибудь динамику видите в концептуальном обществе? Если видите в плюс, в минус?
Well, polarization. People of action in one direction, people of idle talk in the other direction.
Люди дела, которые в одну сторону, они внутри себя как соорганизовываются?
Well, they somehow co-organize.
Ну как-то, я имею в виду, где
Productive. They co-organize productively. Well, people of idle talk, they always push likes and rally on forums of the internet.
И дизлайки.
Dislikes too. Unfortunately, after all, a fair share of the population is politically willless. If we talk about the spectrum of interests, then the interests of the majority relate only to three groups: personal, family day-to-day, and professional, as the basis for the economic provision of family and personal interests. The majority have no interests of a political character.
Мирское впереди, духовное.
No, it's not worldly and spiritual, because politics is also very worldly. But it's just such a circle of interests of the majority. Three groups: personal, mainly psychophysiological consumer; family day-to-day, who obeys whom, who is the head of the family, how to raise children, how to pay for the life of the family, participate in the consumption race, and professional business. Somehow you need to feed yourself and feed your family.